Our Presidential Contenders series continues this week. Our exclusive interview with New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. He'll discuss the 2016 campaign, the Syrian refugee crisis, climate change, and much more in studio. And later, he's the best-selling author of The Kingdom Keepers and Peter and the Starcatcher series. He joins us to talk about writing great stories and helps us kick off our Story-Ented Literacy Initiative. Ridley Pearson is here, and he'll be taking your calls and emails live. So stay right there. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Governor Chris Christie and Ridley Pearson are both straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. You can find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@EWTN.com. And later, if you've got a question for Ridley Pearson, particularly you Kingdom Keepers fans, and you know who you are, the number is 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally 205-271-2980. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Investigators are searching for answers after Wednesday's massacre in San Bernardino, California. Syed Rizwan Farouk and his wife, Tashfeen Malik, slaughtered 14 people and wounded more than 20 others in an attack at a social service center shortly after Syed left a holiday banquet he was attending there. The husband and wife returned later, wearing military-style gear, ski masks, and wielding assault rifles. They were killed in their getaway vehicle about 4 hours later in a furious gun battle with police a few miles from the killing spree. They had 1,600 rounds of ammo with them, and at their home, investigators found 12 pipe bombs, tools for making more explosives, and 3,000 rounds of ammunition. On Thursday, President Barack Obama would only say that the shooting rampage could be terror-related. He also raised the possibility that it was due to a workplace dispute. The president made another appeal for gun control legislation. And the United States will expand its fight against ISIS. On Tuesday, speaking before a congressional committee, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter announced the deployment of additional special forces to Iraq and Syria.
We're sending, on President Obama's orders and the chairman's and my advice, Special Operations Forces personnel to Syria to support the fight against ISIL. Through our own action and those of our coalition partners, the military campaign will destroy ISIL's leadership and forces, deprive it of resources and safe haven and mobility.
Carter did not offer troop numbers, but said the U.S. forces would act in cooperation with the Iraqi government and could conduct unilateral operations in Syria. Carter also, in an historic announcement, said that all jobs in combat units would be open to women for the first time. Meanwhile, British lawmakers on Wednesday approved airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Syria. Ahead of this week's parliamentary debate, Cardinal Vincent Nichols of Westminster said that military action against ISIS is justifiable, given the grave harm being inflicted on innocent civilians. These efforts, he said, must be combined with sustained diplomatic and humanitarian efforts. On Tuesday, police in Italy and Kosovo arrested 4 Kosovars with ties to ISIS for threats made against Pope Francis. The 4 men were under investigation for being terror apologists and inciting racial hatred via social media. According to police, the suspects had posted images on Facebook of themselves with weapons and in poses typical of ISIS fighters. Most alarming, however, were the men's posts celebrating the Paris attacks and threatening Pope Francis. They said, quote, "There won't be any Pope after this one. This is the last." end quote. With a renewed urgency, world leaders gathered in Paris are expected to develop the first ever universal climate change agreement. After 20 failed attempts, the 150-plus nations are working toward a non-binding, self-defined emission goal so that each nation can control its own greenhouse gases. Since the U.S. Congress does not need to ratify such an agreement, President Barack Obama was confident that it would prevail.
So our task here in Paris is to turn these achievements into an enduring framework for human progress. Not a stopgap solution, but a long-term strategy that gives the world confidence in a low-carbon future.
Aboard his papal plane returning from his African visit earlier this week, the Pope said that mankind is on the verge of suicide because of climate change. He said it is either now or never for the world's leaders in Paris. We'll discuss all of this later with Governor Chris Christie. Stay tuned for that. And the Republican-led U.S. House dealt a blow to President Obama's climate change policies this week. On Tuesday, lawmakers voted 243 to 181 to block EPA rules that would strictly limit power plant emissions. House Speaker Paul Ryan said the vote was about protecting American jobs in a troubled economy.
I don't think we're out of step with public opinion wanting jobs, wanting economic growth, weighing the costs and the benefits. And I think when you weigh the costs and the benefits against these so-called legally binding obligations, they don't add up.
President Obama has promised his veto. In Northern Ireland, a Belfast High Court ruling could lead to an easing of abortion laws. Abortions are currently legal in Northern Ireland only when the mother's life is at risk. However, Judge Mark Horner said Monday that the current law criminalizing abortion violates provisions of the European Convention on Human Rights. He ruled that the law protecting preborn children is incompatible with human rights. The bishops of Northern Ireland decried the ruling as profoundly disquieting and took issue with the judges describing babies with fatal abnormalities as, quote, doomed. Northern Ireland's Attorney General is likely to appeal. And the debate on the recently completed Synod of Bishops for the Family continues. This week, Cardinal Raymond Burke took issue with the conclusions of a close papal confidant, Father Antonio Spadaro. The Jesuit priest recently penned a summary of the Synod in which he claimed the Synod Fathers approved an internal forum approach allowing divorced and remarried Catholics to receive communion. In other words, remarried divorcees could receive the sacrament without an annulment so long as there is a process that includes reconciliation and repentance. Not so, according to Cardinal Burke. In an op-ed for the National Catholic Register, he noted that several Synod participants have reported that the bishops did not approve the internal forum solution. Moreover, Cardinal Burke said the Synod cannot open a door which does not exist and cannot exist, namely a discernment in conscience which contradicts the truth about the supreme sanctity of the Most Holy Eucharist and the indissolubility of the marriage bond. And a federal judge has canceled Christmas in Indiana, or at least one version of it. On Wednesday, U.S. District Judge John DiGiulio issued a ruling forbidding students at Concord High School near South Bend from performing a living nativity scene. The school has conducted the annual Christmas show every year since 1970. The Freedom from Religion Foundation and the American Civil Liberties Union sued the school district to have the performance pulled, backing a student and a parent who took offense. The judge ruled that the nativity scene impermissibly conveys an endorsement of religion and thus runs afoul of the Establishment Clause. The Christmas show is scheduled for next weekend. The school district is considering an appeal. And the internet was aflame this week with dire reports concerning Mother Angelica's health. It all stemmed from a recent newsletter from the Sisters of Our Lady of the Angels Monastery in Hanceville. In it, the sisters mentioned that Mother's health had declined in recent months and that she was placed on a feeding tube. This led to wild speculation and alarm, which included one headline that read that Mother was, quote, fighting for her life. Mother, however, is doing fairly well, all things considered. I saw her just a few weeks ago. She has, in fact, been on the feeding tube for months now, and she's getting the nutrients that's needed. Her condition's stable. She still receives the Holy Eucharist almost every day. She sleeps a lot, but she's more mobile than she's been in quite a while. The nuns even take her to the chapel from time to time. So though she's not greatly improved, she looks well, and she's certainly well taken care of. So keep Reverend Mother and her sisters in your prayers. Well, 'tis the season to trim and light your Christmas tree. And this week, two of America's most iconic trees were lit. Here in Washington, House Speaker Paul Ryan helped light the Capitol Christmas tree on Wednesday. The 74-foot Alaskan spruce was decorated with more than 2,000 handmade ornaments.
I hope it will be a reminder throughout this Christmas season that even in the darkest of times, God is there, and He is good, and we should look out for Him in our lives. We should strive to do His work. And for those of us who are Christians, He gave us His only Son. And for all Americans, whatever you believe, He gave us this great country.
And with much pomp and celebration, a national TV audience and tens of thousands of people watched the 10-ton Christmas tree come alive at New York's Rockefeller Center. It was covered with 45,000 lights and 5 miles of wiring. How'd you like to put that in a box come January? When we return, New Jersey Governor and GOP presidential candidate Chris Christie joins us here for our Presidential Contenders series. And Ridley Pearson is straight ahead. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Don't miss a moment of this. Welcome back to The World Over. My first guest is the no-nonsense governor of the state of New Jersey. He's seeking the Republican nomination for president and recently received an important endorsement from New Hampshire's union leader. To discuss some issues, the state of the race, we're joined on set by Governor Chris Christie. Governor,
happy to be back, Raymond.
Great to see you.
Me.
I want to start with this shooting in San Bernardino. It is gobbling the headlines. This is the 355th mass shooting we've had in the country. This particular assailant, this Syed Farouk, he apparently has been radicalized, was in Saudi Arabia for a period. They're saying, Ted Cruz, your opponent, said America's at war. Do you think that's the case?
Sure. Listen, I've said that this is our world war. And, you know, the Pope has said it too.
Yeah, Third
Pope
World
has
War.
said this is the Third World War, and it's being done a little bit at a time. And we need to be prepared for this. It's going to be a different kind of challenge. It's going to be a long-term challenge for our country. But we need a commander-in-chief who's going to be strong and resolute and clear.
I want to play our current commander-in-chief for you. He's claiming that this could be workplace-related, Governor Christie. Listen to this.
We don't know why they did it. We don't know at this point the extent of their plans. We do not know their motivations. It is possible that this was terrorist related, but we don't know. It's also possible that this was workplace related.
Do you share the president's thought that this could be workplace related?
I think it's a remote possibility, if any possibility at all, Raymond. From the time I started watching this last night, an hour or two, and as a former federal prosecutor, if it's a workplace problem, you don't go home, pick up your wife, put on the tactical gear, get the semi-automatic weapons, and come and shoot the place up. Yeah. This looks like a planned attack. And here's the really dangerous thing. If the developmentally disabled center in San Bernardino, California is a terrorist target, that means any place in America is now a target.
Now, the president's solution is we need more gun control. Now, California has one of the most strident gun control laws in the country, and San Bernardino as well. Is that the answer here?
No, it's not the answer. The answer is intelligence. Raymond, the answer is that this president has weakened our country, along with some Republicans, by taking away the NSA's ability to collect metadata.
Just this week.
Just this
outlawed.
week, right? And made us weaker, and has killed the morale of the intelligence community as well by essentially accusing them of having committed crimes during the Bush administration, when in fact those intelligence officers were working with the full authority of the Department of Justice. This is wrong, and it's making us more vulnerable and weak, and the president has helped to cause it.
What, if you were commander-in-chief, what would you be doing now? Given your experience in the wake of 9/11, you prosecuted many of those terrorists, what would you be doing differently?
First thing is that we've got to restore our intelligence capability. That's our first line of defense here, to defend the homeland, which has got to be the president's first job. Defend our homes, our safety, our security here in America. Intelligence and law enforcement need to be strengthened. And we need a president who's going to support law enforcement, not accuse them of wrongdoing every time a situation comes up. Next, we need to strengthen our military. Our military needs to be strengthened. We're at World War 1940 levels on our Army. We're at World War I levels for our Navy. This is outrageous, and the rest of the world knows it, and that's why they're taking advantage of us. So that's what we need to do.
I need to talk about refugees for a moment. We've been hearing a lot about the Syrian refugees, people making humanity's cry here, saying, look, these people have nowhere to go. A seven-member family just moved into New Jersey. You're opposed to accepting refugees, even orphans. Why? That seems heartless.
No, it's not. And here's why. Because the director of the FBI has gone on Capitol Hill and said, we cannot vet these folks. And now the president wants to increase the flow tenfold, and he wants to do it in half the time he's done it already. It's not possible to do. It puts American safety and security at risk. Here's what we should do, Raymond. We should create a safe zone in Syria for these folks, with NATO and Arab troops, and with a no-fly zone. That will help to keep them in Syria and keep them safe. I am not heartless to the humanity and the absolute cost, but we cannot put American lives at risk.
Governor Tom Keene, your predecessor, 9/11 investigative commissioner, he said that your policy is helping ISIS, that this will only help foment more of these attacks. You'd say what?
I say he's wrong. With all due respect to Governor Keene, who is a friend, he's wrong. The fact is the American president's first priority is the protection of the American people. And until the FBI director looks me in the eye and tells me he can vet these folks and assure our safety, I'm not doing it.
I want to talk about climate change for a moment. The president has been in Paris hammering out this agreement. Capitol Hill is not too fond of this deal. If you were president and these Paris talks are underway, what would President Christie do? Would you sign on to something like this, or would you try to get the major powers to step away and say, let's take a closer look at the science here?
I wouldn't sign on to this because it's wrong. There is no crisis going on right now, and we don't need to tie America with one hand behind its back. What we need to do, the president hasn't focused on the right type of climate change. The climate we need to change is right here in America. We have the people who are distrustful of their government because it doesn't work and it rigs the game against them. We have worse racial tensions now than we've had in the last 7 years of this presidency. The climate at home needs to be changed. You should be worried more about that and less about what's going on overseas.
Yet the president says, Governor Christie, this is a #1 national security issue. The Pope says it's now or never for the environment. We must sign a pact. You don't think it has any relevance? It shouldn't be signed at all?
No, I don't think this pact should be signed, and I don't think that we should be imposing something on America that much of the rest of the world won't follow.
Do you believe it's man-made, the climate change we're seeing?
I believe that the climate changes because it changes all the time, and I believe that human activity contributes to it. Of course it does. But does that mean that we have a crisis that we then have to tax our way out of, which is what the Obama plan is? No, I don't believe that.
I want to play something for you. This is Donald Trump, who's leading the pack right now, your competitor for the GOP nomination. He said this about you last night in Manassas. Roll that.
Governor Christie wants to raise the age so that you have to wait another, pretty extended period of time. It's not fair. You've been paying in for years.
He says these people have been paying in, Governor Christie, and you're trying to change the rules on Social Security.
Yeah, well, what we want to do is make sure they get their Social Security check. And you can't wave a magic wand and have that happen by itself. Our plan is really specific. We would raise the retirement age 2 years, and we would phase it in over 25 years. So it's a 1-month increase per year for 25 years. It would affect no one that's currently on Social Security or anyone who's near Social Security age at this time.
Do you think it was risky rolling that out so early because it allows your competitors to say, oh, he's going to destroy your Social Security? I heard this over the Christmas break. Somebody said, you know, I like Governor Christie, but the Social Security thing, I don't think people have read your plan.
Well, they haven't, and I don't think it's risky. I think it's leadership. You know, we can continue to ignore this problem, and then it will eat us alive. 71% of all federal spending today, Raymond, is on entitlements and debt service. In 1960, when John Kennedy was elected president, it was 26%. We are spending all of America's money on things in the rearview mirror and nothing on America's future. That's going to make us a weaker nation for our children and grandchildren. I don't think any Social Security recipient wants a weaker America for their grandchild, and they want to make sure for those who really need it, the difference between heat and rent and food, those people get it. But we also say for folks who are making over $200,000 a year in retirement income, you don't need a Social Security check.
I want to talk about this race, which is getting more unpredictable by the minute, and I see you smiling. You identified with Laura Ingraham the other day your three main competitors in this race, and you identified them as Bush, Kasich, and Rubio. Why those three candidates and not Donald Trump?
Now listen, she just said, who do I see as my main competition? And I believe, given our background and our experience, that those are the folks that I'm competing with the most heavily. And I'll wind up competing with everybody, Raymond, by the time it's over. And then they'll all wind up supporting me because I'm going to be the nominee.
I want to talk to you about the union leader endorsement in New Hampshire. This is a major endorsement, and we've seen your numbers now. The latest PPP poll, you were up from 9th place to 4th place in only a span of a few days. What's happening in New Hampshire? I know you've spent a lot of time there. Do you have a residence there yet?
Not yet, but I feel like the Radisson in Manchester might be my residence. I've just spent my 50th day in New Hampshire. It's more than any other candidate by far. In fact, here's an interesting statistic. Mary Pat, my wife, has spent more days in New Hampshire than any other candidate but me.
Oh my gosh.
Herself. And so we're up there, we're working really hard. And I think what you're seeing in the polls is two things. Hard work is paying off, and people are hearing my message. And I think the combination of those two is giving us some momentum in New Hampshire.
What's the path here? You win New Hampshire, and then you go on to fight it out in these other states. Do you have a national campaign ready to attack on all fronts when Super Tuesday rolls around?
Raymond, if the biggest thing I have to worry about on the evening of February 9th is that I've won the New Hampshire primary and I've got to compete in the rest of the country, we're already, by Christmas, we'll be on the ballot in 27 states. We'll get to all 50, but by Christmas, we're already on the ballot in 27, which is going to be competitive with or better than most candidates. We're ready to run a national campaign. We're ready to be the nominee and to beat Hillary Clinton next November.
Okay, two quick questions before I let you go.
Yep.
What has been the most disappointing thing about this campaign for you?
You know, it's that people who had supported you in the past don't necessarily support you now, and it's always disappointing to see people you considered friends being with another candidate, but you learn that that's the way it goes and you get over it, but it's disappointing.
What about running out on the hustings and talking to these people? I watch you at C-SPAN, on C-SPAN at 9 o'clock at night, and you're at a diner in New Hampshire. It's freezing cold, and there you are holding forth for hours. This has got to be grueling. I mean, there's a reason that Donald Trump is, playing on the links at Mar-a-Lago while you're in New Hampshire. But you're in the trenches.
It's relentless, but that's what it should be, because the presidency is relentless, and you need to be ready for that. I'm ready to be president of the United States, and this campaign will only make me more ready. And so I enjoy it, though. I will tell you that I get energy from interacting with people. Instead of getting more tired, I don't get tired till I get back to the hotel.
Yeah.
Then I flop on the bed and go to sleep. But when I'm out there, I get energy from people because they're so concerned for our country and its future, and they are desperate for strong leadership. And when they identify with me and say, we're going to vote for you, and that gives you a lift of adrenaline and energy that is unlike anything else.
How has your faith sustained you through this? This has been rough. I mean, there's a piece in the New York Times today. Every day you're being hit at home and nationally.
Yeah, well,
this can't be easy on you and your family.
You know what? Our family has a great attitude about it, and a lot of it is grounded in our faith, because we're a strong Catholic family that believes that this is a mission for us. That I have something to offer to the country, and that God has given me the tools to make this run. And we know that there's no guarantee about how it will end, but what we know is that the mission itself is a noble cause and is something that we're called to do. And so as a family, it's just made us stronger and closer, to tell you the truth.
Governor Chris Christie, we will be watching that
Thanks,
mission
Raymond.
unfold. Thank you for being here, and we'll be following you in the days ahead. Up next, New York Times bestselling kids author Ridley Pearson is here. He'll talk about how his work and reaching out to kids have changed his life. And I'll kick off my new literacy initiative, Storyented, when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. He has written more than 4 dozen best-selling books for kids and adults. You probably know him best from his wildly successful Kingdom Keepers and Peter and the Starcatchers series. He is a notorious workaholic and is well known for the extensive research he undertakes for each project. He joins us tonight to discuss the craft of storytelling and his latest book, The Return. Book 1, The Disneylands, or Return to the Disneylands, right? Or Return Disneylands. I got it right. I'll get it eventually. We will also launch tonight a new literacy initiative, Storyented, and he's going to help me. Please welcome New York Times best-selling author Ridley Pearson. Ridley,
Thank you, Raymond.
what an honor to have you here.
Appreciate to be here.
My family, particularly my boys, are rabid Kingdom Keepers fans.
Well, you better
And-
lock them up. That means there's something wrong.
Well,
with
you know, and
I'm so glad for that.
we go to the Disney parks, and the first time we saw the very first Kingdom Keepers book, it was there at the Disney parks, and they've kept reading every one of them. How many do you have now? This is 8?
Yeah, this is 8, and I've just finished 9.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get into that whole series, but I want to back up a little bit. I want to talk about you, your family. You come from a musical and literary family, both your mom and dad.
Yeah, I do. There was a lot of creativity, and you know, when you're talking to middle schools, as we both do, you get the question of sort of how did you get into this, and it dawned on me that my grandfather on my mother's side, if you can believe this, was born in 1864, I think, or 1883. I'm sorry, 1883, and he strung telegraph wire across the West. So he had stories. He would literally sit me on his knee and tell stories about living with Native Americans back in the early 1900s, and I'm sure he made it all up. But they were great
They were
stories. Oh
spellbound.
my gosh. And my paternal grandfather was one of these guys who could memorize long-form poetry. So he would sit you on his lap in a different visit and recite Charge of the Light Brigade or one of these, you know, 90-minute poems. And so I think this oral storytelling, despite that my father was a writer, my mom was a fine artist, this idea of sort of always telling story got in me from a very little boy, very young age.
But then you're in college, and then you leave college.
Yeah.
You go off to be a musician.
Yeah, I went off to try to be James Taylor. How did that work out?
Yeah, well, but you toured for a while. What was it, like 6 years, 7 years?
11
More than
yeah.
that?
And I wrote about 300 songs.
And how did the music writing and performing shape and help you today?
It's, I don't think, there are 2 big pieces that I think helped me be a writer. One is I went to a boarding school called Pomfret School. And it taught me, you know, you learn all these things in high school and all of that, but it taught me how to study, and it taught me self-discipline. So that was just gigantic. And you, in a band, you learn that when you turn your song over to these 4 or 5 other guys, and I would write, I score, so we had a flute and cellos and all these things.
Boy.
And I would put all that in front of everybody, and it would sound just great. And then about 3 months into touring it, I would go, well, that's not the stuff I wrote, and it sounded really good. And I realized that role of collaborative effort, which is what the Kingdom Keepers is about. It's 5 kids collaboratively trying to solve puzzles and defeat these people who want to take over the Disney kingdom.
The overtakers, and we'll get into those momentarily. You write for 8.5 years before you're ever published.
Yeah, that was that whole music.
How did you keep that? You were touring at the time and you were writing?
I was playing a lot of music at the time, and I was writing about 6 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Oh my gosh.
I wrote 11 screenplays for television, teleplays in those days. None of them sold. I
And
wrote
what kept you going?
I just love telling stories. You know, I think if you know, you can't really teach writing. You can teach better writing, but you've got the bug, you know. You've got to, something's got to get, you're afflicted. Something's got to get you up at 6 in the morning behind the chair other than a paycheck or this or that. You want to do it.
Right, you have to
and
share
I've just
this.
always loved doing it. I was the guy in middle school who would tell all the fiction to matchmake. I'd say, you know, Tommy really has a crush on you. Oh my gosh. And the girl would go, really? Really? And, you know, Tommy had no idea who this person was.
You just wanted to see the
I
clash.
just wanted to make it happen.
Watch the drama. I love it. Tell me about Lou Bolt, who is your protagonist in a number of thrillers.
He is.
You wrote thrillers initially.
Yeah, and still do.
Yep.
I wrote police procedurals with Lou Bolt and a character named Daphne Matthews.
Yeah.
And you know, they early on when you're writing, as you know, they say write what you know or what you love.
But you didn't know policing,
No,
did you?
I didn't, but I loved reading those kinds of books. And so I devoted myself to really study. And I do a ton of research still for all these books, and because it's the really fun part.
You said
and
at
you
one
put
point-
fact into fiction. And Lou Bolt came out of my imagination, and then 3.5 years, 4 years into writing him, I met him.
A cop walks in and you went,
I had heard about this guy, Don Cameron, on the Seattle police force, and this prosecuting attorney had used one of my books to help solve a crime.
murder?
And he said, if there's ever anything I can do for, and I said, stop, can you get me a sit down with Don Cameron? I'd tried to get this probably 6 times. And he said, I bet I can. And so Don Cameron saw me. He interviewed me in the interrogation room instead of his office. And so I swing this door open, and it was Lou Bolt. It was the very character.
looks like the character
and
come
I
to life.
talked to him for like 90 minutes, and I said, I'm sorry if I'm tripping all over myself, but you are Lou Bolt. And he's a very slash-mouth guy, you know. And this little grin comes on. He goes, Ridley, I know I'm Lou Bolt. I've read all the books. You know, so it was a marriage made in heaven.
I love
It's
it.
great.
You talked a moment ago about the research you do, and you do extensive research, even for these
I do,
Kingdom
even-
Keepers
yeah,
books,
even
which
for
we'll
the
get
crazy
into in a
books.
moment. You were researching a book called The First Victim and then The Pied Piper, and it led you to a special little girl.
It did.
Tell me about
it led
that.
us to Story Pearson.
Your daughter.
Yeah, my wife and I had both talked about how we love adoption when we were courting. And then I wrote those 2 books, and it was during Pied Piper, which is about some people sneaking into the country in a container ship, which doesn't seem novel anymore, but back then it only happened once that anybody knew of. And on my desk, which was the dining room table at the time, she saw a statistic that 30,000 little girls in China were moved into orphanages every year, and about 2,000 got out to adoption. And she said, remember when we talked about adoption? This is where our next child comes from. And,
it was
so
so.
now we have a junior in high school who's been with us since she was 4.5 months old, is the light of our lives, along with Paige. And yeah, it's been just a terrific working out.
And one of your daughters was responsible for Peter and the Starcatchers, which people know now not only from the books and the
Yes.
series, but the Broadway
But a play.
which I
Yeah, the
saw,
play's
beautiful
been so
play, and
fun.
it's toured the country, it's been everywhere.
Yeah.
What was the germ of this
Well, you know
idea?
how as writers we're always looking for ideas, and like you, I'm sure I have an abundance of ideas, but I'm always observant. I always try to keep my ears and eyes open. And I tell kids this, you know, that if you want to be a writer, keep your ears and eyes open. And I was reading to my then 5-year-old daughter, who's now 18 and a student in Washington, D.C. And she said to me, we were reading Peter Pan, and she said to me, how did Peter meet Captain Hook? And I said, well, I'll be darned. How come Peter can fly? Why did he never grow old? And all the prequel ideas flooded into me. Where did he meet Captain Hook? Tinkerbell, where'd she come from? On and on and on. And I play in a rock and roll band with a whole bunch of crazy authors, including Dave Barry.
And Stephen King and
Stephen
Amy
King,
Tan.
Amy Tan, Scott Turow, Mitch Albom. And I was staying at Dave's house to play one of these shows and mentioned this to Dave, and his eyes kind of went wide. And I said, you know, I'm thinking about writing this prequel. And I kill people for a living in my murder mysteries, and you write booger jokes. And you know,
Perhaps we could work
Could we
together?
make something that was suspenseful but funny, and do it together? And
Or a
he
murderous
slapped
booger,
the table
one of
and
the
said,
two.
"I'm in."
Yeah, I
So,
love it. And that was
off we
it.
went. That was it.
And you all did multiple books
We ended
in
up
2
writing
series.
10 books together. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Then The Kingdom Keepers comes along.
Yes.
Where did this originate? And tell me
Have
about,
you ever been to the Disney park?
where is that? Where
Down
are
in
those?
Orlando, Florida.
Oh, I think I might have gone there once or twice.
So I went there once as a
Only one time?
40-some-year-old.
Oh,
Never
my.
had been.
What?
I grew up to the Wonderful World of Color. I was Disney everything, but I'd never been to the park.
Yeah, I grew up in New Orleans, and we would make the pilgrimage sometimes twice a year.
Well, it's worth going 5 times a
Wow.
year. But I went for the first time in my 40s with our kids and with Dave Barry and his family. And after the fireworks, you walk out.
Right.
There's 80,000 of you leaving the park. And I looked around, and that day, I know we've shared some photos. I had also met Mickey Mouse and some of the princesses and really just had the most special day. And none of the characters were leaving the park. And I had what I call my Toy Story moment. You know, when Andy's door shuts and the toys come alive. I thought, so what does happen for these next 9 hours when no one's here? And I just could picture Mickey and people peering around their doors going, have they left yet?
Is the coast clear?
Yeah. And then what's that world? And that became the Kingdom Keepers.
And where did the Overtakers come from? These are the villains.
The Overtakers came from Walt Disney's unbelievable creative imagination and the fact that he borrowed from the Brothers Grimm some terrific dark characters, and they either get slapstick time or they get very little time at all in the animated features.
Right.
And it bugged me because he had really good, dark, deep characters
Villains, yeah.
that weren't getting used. And I thought they would be upset about this. You know, like, why are we always made fun of? And why is this park so fun? Why can't it be mean and scary? And that they would want to take the park over, get rid of all these stupid little fluffy characters, and it would be Maleficent's park. So
There is a redemptive edge in these books
There
that
is.
I've seen. And my boys have read them, my little girl's reading them now. There is a strong sense of good versus evil,
Right.
justice. Your thrillers are marked by that same sensibility. Are you aware of that?
I am very aware of that. Yeah, and I believe in that.
Tell me, I was impressed to come across something. You said in an interview you read the Bible every day.
I do.
Why? And how does it affect your work?
Excuse me. My wife introduced me to that idea. You know, not only a little prayer to get you started in the day, but to read the Bible. And they're the greatest stories that are there, for one thing.
Yeah. And they and that
they're the
grounding.
basis of every story that we read, really.
Yeah.
And amazing characters. And the Christ's life is so beginning, middle, and end. And it's the way all drama has been shaped since the Greeks, is beginning, middle, and end, with including a resurrection piece at the end.
Yeah.
So it doesn't hurt, you know, to rub up against the greats.
Yeah.
That's,
And that one's pretty great.
and you know, on a spiritual side, it's instructive and calming and soothing, and I think it you know, although I get teased about it by some of my friends, it works for me. I'm not saying it's for everybody. It just works for me.
Tell me, because I when I read that, I thought people don't realize. People see these books, and they say, "Wow, this must be great to be an author." They don't realize when, there is something great
Sure.
about it, and it's wondrous and wonderful that you can share a piece of your own heart and understanding, and let someone else go on that journey and find their own way through it. There is also, you and I know, when you're sitting at that desk alone, watching other people live life or hearing about it, there is a heavy cost to it, and you're carrying all these worlds and people around in your head that no one else has access to until it's published. Does it help you cope with that? Does the
I'm
spiritual
sure it does. Yeah, I'm
side
sure it
sort
does.
of help you?
Yeah, just
get
like
through
singing
that?
a hymn does. I mean, it, you know, it frees up it gets you focused on something else. I think that because I write multiple books. There's
many do you do a year?
I'm doing 3 right now, but
Simultaneously?
simultaneously. And during the Dave Barry years, it was 2.5. which made me think I might be able to do 3, and I think it was a mistake. But, you know, you've got a lot of stories and a lot of characters and just a lot going on in your head. Everybody does. I mean, I'm not claiming it's harder work than anything else, but it's busy up there. And it's, you know, it's nice to still that and find a quiet place. And it's nice to bring some of those ideas into the work. One of the early parts of The Kingdom Keepers is that these kids are actually holograms in the park. That's how I worked it out with Disney attorneys to allow me to wreak havoc in their park. But
DHI technology.
DHI, yeah, daylight hologram imaging.
Or Disney Host Interactive.
True. Boy, you have read this, Raymond. I'm impressed.
I'm there.
So there's a piece of it early on, and I carry it through the whole deal, which is that these kids are holograms, but that if they allow fear into themselves, they begin to get solid. They begin to lose that hologram, and they are very vulnerable at that point. And that's the other answer to your Bible thing, is I think the more we can keep fear out of our lives, you know, the easier our lives are than when we let fear in.
Before we go to break, George R.R. Martin says all writers are either architects or gardeners.
I love that.
Which are you? Do you build
I am an architect.
outliner? You're an architect.
Boy.
You build the whole
Am I an
outline.
Architect? I build the outline. It takes months. I build the characters, the character arcs. I go and do all this research because I think the more fact I can put in my fiction, the more I can suspend your disbelief, which is my role, is to, if you start thinking, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, the book goes right across the room. So
do you write bios of all the characters?
I do. I write bios and little Bibles and what food they like and all these things that'll never show up in the book, but I know them.
But you
better.
know them,
Yeah.
and it fleshes them out.
Yeah.
Very interesting. We will leave it there for a moment. Now, look, if you have a question for Ridley, you can call in now, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., 1-800-221-9460, or internationally, 205-271-2980, on email worldover@EWTN.com, or you can tweet me at Raymond Arroyo. In a moment, I'll introduce a new literacy program. It's called Storyented, and Ridley will take your calls and emails. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. I'm joined once again in D.C. by best-selling author Ridley Pearson. We're launching a new literacy initiative tonight. It's called Storyented, because I believe stories orient our lives and help us find our place in the world. Now, our catchphrase is find your story, find your way. The idea is to bring authors and readers together, sort of an international book club each month. If you go to storyented.com, you can discover more. We've got some literacy tips, some recommended books, and much more. I have some questions for you, Ridley. They're already coming in.
We all have great stories, don't we?
Well, and that's what, and it's not only those
Isn't
of us
it
who
incredible?
write them.
Oh, no.
As you talked about your grandfather.
It's everybody.
We all have stories, and we have to share. It's so important that you share them with kids.
I mean, I can think of, you know, one afternoon when I was 12 years old. It's its own book, you know. I mean, we all have those stories.
We have a phone
Fabulous.
call. You want to go to a phone call? Are you there? Go ahead. Who's calling? George from D.C. You're on The World Over. What's your question?
Hello. So what
Go
was
ahead,
it
George.
like? What was it like to spend the night in Disneyland and doing research on your book?
Good
So
question, George.
George knows something about this.
You have a reader.
Yes, so my one requirement when Disney and I discussed doing these books was that I would need full access to their theme parks. And they said, we don't give that. And I said, okay, but that's, from my crime writing, that's how I do things. And they called me back about a month later and said, we've got a VIP pass for you. You can go into any park around the world for free. And if you call ahead, we will assign a Disney Imagineer, the people who design the parks, to be your guide, and you can go in any hour you want.
To any attraction you want.
Anything I wanted to do, basically in the dark, as George said, in Disneyland, or Disney World in this case. For the first several years it was Disney World. So one of the first places I went to was It's a Small World. But it was a very different It's a Small World. It was 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. The park is creepy, you know, the most magical place on earth. It's so perfect that when no one's in it, it is a scary ghost town.
Wow.
And we walked over and we got to Small World and went in. It was dark in there, only emergency lighting, no music. All the dolls are, you know, stuck in their little place. And 2 of the dolls moved. and I just jumped out of the boat I was in.
Oh,
And
you took the ride.
Yeah,
You're in the
yeah,
ride.
I mean, you know, it's dead quiet. We're sloshing around because I wanted to see what it's like when it's creepy. But two of the dolls moved, and I and the guy next to me said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Two of the dolls just moved." And I ended up putting that into the book because that's the stuff you can't make up. And Raymond, two of the dolls moved. I'm not being facetious here. Two of the dolls moved.
And that's one of the creepier scenes in the book.
Well, I still can't go in there.
Richard from Los Angeles, you're on the world over. What's your question for Ridley?
Hi, Ridley. Raymond. I'm having trouble getting my son to read. He loves nonfiction, but I can't get him to grab onto fictional stories. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, well, this is very self-serving, but we hear from many, many hundreds of parents who say that the first Kingdom Keepers book is what got their child reading. Dave Barry and I also used to get that with Peter and the Starcatchers.
Yep.
They're two very different stories. One is set in the 1800s and is the origins of Peter Pan, and the Kingdom Keepers is about 5 kids inside Disney World after dark. But for whatever reason, they're also used, Kingdom Keepers 1 is also used in institutions that work with autistic kids. And I know we don't have time for this, but I have an amazing story about a parent.
Okay, tell me.
And that is, I got a call one time, or I got an email one time from a woman who was going on a trip and wanted Dave's and my permission to take our book, Peter and the Starcatchers, with her because her son had gotten into reading just a few weeks earlier, and she had to leave on this long trip. Her name was Katie Coleman, and she was going to the International Space Station.
Oh, my God.
And she ended up taking the series there and reading the book from outer space to her son in Austin, Texas.
Oh,
the biggest compliment you could ever get in your life.
Talk about
and they
the
read all 4
Starcatchers.
books. So that was another case of a mother saying, my son's really into this book, and it's the only book I can get him to read. So you've got to find the right book.
Yeah.
Our daughter, Paige, was being handed all these princess books. She just wasn't a reader. She went with me to a bookstore one day. She found an action book, and that started her. Pretty soon she was reading Lee Child when she was like 9 years old. You know?
No, it's I mean,
just let them do what they want to do.
Yeah, we have some tips on Storyented about getting kids hooked on reading, and it's an important adventure. And one of the things you do, let them choose what they want to read, even if it's a graphic novel at first, or it's something that might not be Mark Twain.
Oh, it can be a
they'll find their
cereal
way.
box.
Right?
Yeah.
They'll find
and
their
you
way.
have to give them. I always give kids the absolute right to abandon my book. You know, if you give me 50 pages and you don't like it, you shouldn't learn to dislike reading because you're stuck in a book.
Yeah.
Put that book aside and find the one you do that'll get you more than 50 pages into it.
Okay, Mary Lou, I think, is calling from Georgia.
Yes.
Mary Lou, you're on the world over.
We
with
could sing a
Ridley
song for
Pearson.
that.
Mary Lou
I'm
from
sorry,
Pennsylvania. Go ahead, Mary Lou.
Hi. Am I speaking with
Oh, yes,
Ridley
darling.
Pearson?
Turn your volume down and talk to us.
Yes, you are.
Oh, all right. I'm turning volume down, yes.
Oh, no,
Thank you.
We're on delay. This is what happens
yeah.
when you don't listen to me the first time, Mary Lou. Just listen to us on the phone, not on TV. It's always delayed. I live with this, like the people on the space station. You know.
Yes.
Okay.
Talk.
Just the
Talk now.
phone,
Tell us your
correct?
question quickly.
Yes.
I'm with the phone.
Okay, Mary Lou, I'm going to have to let you go. I love you, but this is taking too much time. Chris, get her question and let me know what it is. I have to get some questions out to you that we ask all of our Story-Ented authors. All she wanted to know, Mary Lou wanted to know, what is the age group for your book? This is a middle grade book, but what is the age group?
It's 8 to 80.
Yep.
What I didn't know when I started the Kingdom Keepers series was how many adult Disney fanatics there are who would love to know what it's like behind the scenes in the parks. And these books each go to a different Disney park, and they show you behind the scenes stuff that you just can't see any other way. So it's taken on a huge adult readership, which is great.
It is amazing. Half of middle grade and young adult books are read by people over 18. So adults are reading.
That's my statistic too. Is exactly.
Do you think it's a yearning for wonder, a sense of wonder, and
it could be. I think it's also that we write when we're writing middle school books, even different than young adult, is they're more PG. They aren't R-rated books.
Right.
And a lot of us get tired of, you know, I write R-rated books for adults in that they're violent and crazy, intense. But we also like to just have great story. J.K. Rowling's who gave this all to us, you know, just wonderful storytelling.
Rita, you have a question for Ridley, and then I have a few.
We've got songs with all these
Go ahead,
people's
Rita.
names.
What's your question?
Ridley, my name is Rita Silvestri. I'm an 81-year-old grandmother, and I started writing when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I never did anything all my life. And finally, 2 or 3 years ago, I started to write, and I'm getting all kinds of good praises from the books that I'm putting out there. But now I've gotten this thing in my head where I would like to go from memoirs to maybe a novel of some sort. And I have it in my mind to write about my family and turn that into a novel. What do you suggest? Is it a good idea, or should I stick with what I know?
Well, I think you're on the right track in that when I volunteer teach occasionally, and the thing I start them with is memoir. And because we can all write comfortably about memoir. It's about us. I don't think you're going to want to go to a novel from that, because you're likely to make it too factual and be too held in the real story of your family. But you might have a wonderful character in your family or a story you've heard about one of your family members, and I'd go more that direction.
I want to ask you a few questions before we run out of time, and then I'm going to do an after show with you for a few minutes if you'll stay around.
Sure.
Your favorite children's book?
Well, the book that transformed me was Harold and His Purple Crayon, which is a very little children's book.
Now why?
But
that's a picture book.
It's a picture book where a young boy could take a crayon and he would paint on the wall and it came to life. And I had that kind of an imagination, and it just spoke to me, and I thought, wow, a world that you can draw and it comes to life. And by about 10 years old, I was writing worlds that came to life. So I think it really changed me. I read a lot of Rudyard Kipling as a kid because of the jungle stories and everything. And as I got older, I got into Edgar Allan Poe and became the demented human I am today. So
I see it all now.
Yeah,
it's all becoming clearer now suddenly. You write 10 hours a day.
Yeah, I write 8 to 10, yeah.
How do you stay there for 10 hours? I mean,
How can you leave?
Oh, I can leave. I can find 1,000 distractions. Let me count the distractions. I mean, after 4 or 5 hours,
Well, I take breaks, of course, all along the way. So I take 15 or 30 minutes for lunch, and I get up and walk around the block and do things like that. But since I've taken on multiple projects, which I thought was going to be a burden, it's turned out to be a blessing, because you get so, when you write one book, at least when I write one book, I get so hung up in that book.
Yeah, you're right.
Oh my gosh,
you can't
I'm living it, I'm breathing it. When you're writing 2 or 3, you have to leave that one completely behind, and you have to
enter a new world,
embody new characters and a new world, and I find it exciting. I can't wait to get to that next one, and by the time I've ended the day, my mysteries and thrillers, which I write first, I'm dying to get back to them. So it's been a real inspiration for me.
Wow. If you could name 3 books that everyone must read, for young people, what are the books that
for young people
that not only touched your life, but the lessons you derived from
I would have to go a little older than young.
Okay.
I mean, I read the Hardy Boys, and I read the landmark books, and I'm sure none of those things are still around as a younger kid. But you know, I think that the To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, I read it almost every year. I've probably read it 25 times, something like that.
Why?
I taught it when I taught. It's the perfect book. It has social issues, moral issues, wonderful sense of family, that terrifying Boo Radley house down the street. It's epic it's not epic in its scope, it's epic in its content. And if there's one book when you get, and what I don't like is that people read this in like 7th and 8th grade. You can read this book, it's fine to read it then for your school. Read it again when you're 18 or 20, because it's unbelievable.
Yeah. What do you think of the new one? Go Set a Watchman.
I've read a little bit of it, and it's fascinating, but I haven't gotten very far in it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Tell me about The Return. This book, the Kingdom Keepers had grown up.
Yeah.
Graduated high school. now Wayne, who's the Imagineer, kind of the Merlin character, he's dying. They go back in time. Tell me about this.
I wrote 7 books, and I am that architect you asked about, so I had planned the entire series, and I tied it off at the end. And then my publisher, of course, came and said, could you write some more Kingdom Keepers books? I said, I tied it off. You know,
It's done.
It's done. And they said, is there any other idea you could? I said, I have a lot of ideas, but none are lighting me on fire. And I had a 10-year-old boy email me and say, what if Finn Whitman, and he didn't know I was even thinking about other ideas. He said, what if Finn Whitman got on King Arthur Carousel? And it went around and around. He started feeling a little dizzy, and he started feeling a little woozy. And he stepped off the carousel, and it wasn't where he got off. But it was 1955 and the opening of the parks.
Oh, my God.
And I went, well, there's the next series. So
There it is.
It's a 3-book series, and the second one comes out at the end of March.
Fascinating. Ridley Pearson, thank you so much
Thank
for being
you
here.
for having me.
And for story-enting all of us. Your books are
Thank you.
wonderful. The latest installment of the Kingdom Keepers series, The Return Book, One Disneylands by Ridley, is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. And be sure to follow my new literacy initiative, Storyented. You can find us at storyented.com. Twitter is @Storyented. Well, that's all the time we have. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, please follow me on Twitter. It's a civil thing to do. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Don't miss our show next week. Papal Posse member Robert Royal is here to talk about the Jubilee year and his new book, A Deeper Vision. Plus, we'll bring you a special preview of an upcoming film, The Young Messiah, with its director, Cyrus Nowrasteh. Cyrus Nowrasteh. Why do I always say Cyrus? And a few weeks from now, we have an incredible surprise guest, someone I've wanted to interview for years, but I'm going to keep it a secret. You'll have to watch to find out who it is.
A little tricky person.
You know, don't tell anybody. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.